Anybody else? I sense that a lot of you wanted to talk about the warm-up. Maybe we can do that in a few minutes. First, I want to see if we're all in the right lecture. Last week, period 3 got furthest ahead. So we talked about how we know about the past, and we talked about how we know about natural variations in climate. I have to apologize. I was a little bit unprepared to get so far ahead. You guys are almost a full day ahead in lecture just because you're always so focused. So I'm not sure I said the right stuff. I want to just repeat myself just in case. Let me do this one. How a greenhouse works, ultraviolet in, infrared, off surfaces, trapped by the glass. We talked about that already in period number 3? Yes? Yes? And likewise, our Earth works much the same way. Some sunlight bounces off because the atmosphere is shiny or because the land is shiny. That's called albedo. Shininess, reflectivity, that's a study goal. We did that already. And there are these gases in our atmosphere which trap heat. The same way that the ceiling of our greenhouse traps heat. Although I don't think I told you this part. We do know how gases trap heat. Not all molecules trap heat. Some gases, when you heat them up, the bonds become unstable. So please look up. I am CO2, like C, O, and the other O. Everybody got that? CO2? Now, when you get CO2 hot, the bonds that connect CO2 become unstable. It's called wobble. Different molecules have a different type of wobble. These are all mapped and named, and I forget all the details. Watch me. There's a wobble that looks kind of like a sine wave. It hurts me to do this because my shoulder's still tweaked. Did I tell you my shoulder was tweaked last week?
Yes.
It's gotten worse. What could that be?
Are you sleeping?
I don't know. I'm asleep when I'm sleeping. I don't know, like with my eyes closed? I don't know, when I wake up, then I'm awake, but I don't know what I was doing when I was asleep.
Probably just holding on.
Well, how could it be so bad? I'm literally walking sideways because it hurts to move my arm.
Just film yourself when you're asleep and then you see what you do. And there you go.
I don't want to know. Pretty sure it's gross. I'm pretty sure it's gross. Nobody wants to touch me. Obviously. Yeah. All right, watch me. Watch me. Ooh, sauna sounds really good. There's this type. There's this type. There's this type. This type. And then there's this one. And then there's one more, right? Was that 5? There's one more.
You gotta do them all again.
Yeah, you gotta do them all.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm missing one. I can't remember what the 6th one was. I took a class in university that described the different wobbles. Anyway, the generic explanation, in case you wanted to know about this, I don't think the College Board is going to ask you. I'm just trying to convince you that the science exists. So heat destabilizes bonds. They start to move. And then when atomic forces restabilize that bond, the heat energy is given off. That's greenhouse gases. And so we also know that we've added more of those greenhouse gases. So the greenhouse effect is natural, but by adding greenhouse gases, we've made it stronger. This is how we are changing climate. Yeah, Philip. Philip's frustrated by his math, so he's acting out.
It's just so easy. It's just lame.
He's nailing it. I think I might have shown you some of these already, right? Some people really care about this climate stuff. Old timers figured it out, made experiments to show that changing the atmosphere would change the planet's temperature. We had some guy who in this is study number 10, by the way. Some guy who in 1957 started recording. In 1959, wrote an article in the New York Times under the idea that CO2 from our fossil fuel emissions would change climate. He got a contract from the US government to start doing that. And he spent his whole life showing that CO2 levels were going up because of our continuing use of fossil fuels. His last name was Keeling, so he made this thing called the Keeling curve. Did I show you this slide? Did we explain why the Earth breathes? Why there's an annual rhythm of ups and downs? Can anybody imagine why CO2 levels have basically gone up from our fossil fuels, but can anybody imagine how they would go up and down within a year?
Plants.
Leaves fall and fall.
Plants and seasons and fall, right? You all agree so far? But here's the news flash. It's always summer somewhere because we've got 2 hemispheres. So you're right, but can anybody explain this further? Why our planet breathes? Look at the annual variation in CO2 levels. It's got something to do with plants and fall and seasons, but it has something to do with hemispheres. It might help if you look at a map. That might make it easier to understand.
More land in the northern hemisphere.
More land in the northern hemisphere. So what would that do? No, kids, get ready. You got to explain this. It's study goal number 10, and it's a surprising fact. What would more plants in the northern hemisphere mean? More photosynthesis when? In the summer? You're right so far, but I'm going to tell you in the end that you're wrong. So what would that mean? Less CO2 because there's more photosynthesis in the summer. And what if I told you that the opposite season uses up the most CO2? The southern summer. Can anybody look at the map and tell me why? What? Because the ocean does more photosynthesis than the land. You all forget, because you live up here, that the majority of photosynthesis happens down at sea level because algae is all over the oceans. Most of land does not have plants. So plants only do a little bit of the CO2 in, oxygen out. The majority of CO2 usage is in the ocean. The Earth breathes because the southern summer uses up more CO2 because the southern hemisphere has more ocean and thus more algae. So for number 10, it's that the southern oceans use more CO2 during their summer. All right. Back to me, please. Excuse me. Back to me. We know how climate changes naturally. We know what temperatures used to be. We know how the greenhouse effect works. We know which ones are the greenhouse gases. We know that CO2's been going up, which is why we've been keeping track of it for so long, because people saw this coming. In addition to the CO2, check this out. We know that all the greenhouse gases have spiked since the Industrial Revolution. They've all gone up. I think I showed you this graph, and that's where we ended, right? This is one of the most important images I'll show you all year, so I want to restate something. If you could all please look up at the graph, you'll notice that each graph has a pink bar, a black line, and a blue bar. Did we discuss this or not last week?
Yes.
Like as the bell rang.
As the bell rang. So let's do this again because some of you are understandably packing up last time. The pink bar is everything we know about nature plus the addition of greenhouse gas from humans. The blue bar is everything we know about nature without adding humans. And the black line is our recordings of temperature. Can you all see that nature used to work pretty well for explaining temperature? But when temperature started to spike, the only plausible explanation is nature plus the activity of humans. The only way that we can explain temperature records is to include human activity. And I can't believe, I actually heard one of our recent presidents say, oh, I don't know about this climate change, the jury is still out. I remember that quote. The jury is still out. I don't know, man. There's plenty of evidence already. Like, we do have records of ocean temp. Watch these graphs. Ocean temperature, sea level, heat gain on the whole planet, different parts of the planet, and especially the ocean, because it has the most thermal mass. Arctic temperatures, ice pack in the North Pole, ice pack in the North Pole in a different study that looked a lot further back in time. The the ice area of Greenland. The volume of ice on Greenland. Changes to global circulation currents that I'll get to later in the period or tomorrow. Average global temperature for the last 160. Other data sets to look at the same thing. Stretching that back all the way 12,000 years like I showed you earlier. And then you keep hearing about how, like, oh, well, there's scientific debate, right? And I'm not really sure the debate's actually scientific. I think most of that debate comes down to other things. I think that the debate that we're having about climate is not actually a debate about climate science. It's about how science conflicts with other systems of belief. But let's look at the science, okay? Because we've done a lot of surveys to find out if climate scientists agree. You realize that that's an easy question. People do surveys all the time. So when you ask all Earth scientists, this was like 10,600 people in the US, basically just went through the book at every university and just called them all up. Thanks. We need to put those in the, I should do that, in the freezer up there. When you look at all Earth scientists in the United States, more than 10,000 of them, 89% agree that humans are primarily responsible for changing the climate. And 89% is pretty high, right? But that means there's 11% who doubt it, which is kind of interesting. It's important to point out that most Earth scientists don't study climate. So on the right is if you just pull out the climatologists, now 99% agree that humans are primarily responsible to change the climate. Another study, slightly smaller numbers, 97 out of 100.
Did you take his exam?
No, he did that.
Oh, let's go.
I wish I had. I like him so much better without it. Okay. There's even a study of opinion studies. So this scientist added together all surveys of scientists to see if there was maybe a bias among them. And if you're ever curious, I can give you the slide. You can look them up yourself. This explains who did the research and who they polled. They polled members of the American Geological Union and American Meteorological Society. They polled the 200 most published climate scientists, the most frequently published climatologists, all scientists who've published something about climate change, all climatologists, all earth science faculty, all climate scientists in a different study, all members of those two organizations again in a different study, and you can see that there's a really robust difference between largely caused by humans and little or no human effect. But here's a slide that might blow your mind. When you make a story on the news, you cannot appear biased. The whole point of news is to offer, quote unquote, both sides of the debate. So the BBC did an analysis of American public opinion and American media. They found that 72% of reporting includes a climate change denier, a man-made climate change denier, and that the American public almost perfectly matches that. In other words, check these numbers. 26% of Americans believe global warming is happening and humans are causing it, 26%. While 74% of Americans are either not convinced or deny that humans are causing global warming. I don't know, man. That really makes my life difficult. Yeah.
Was that like? I'm wondering if that's like changed at all more recently. Like more people have said yes. How old is the graph?
Yeah, I think this study was done in 2008.
Okay.
So I'd be curious to see how it's changed, but I don't think it's changed appreciably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the point they're making is probably still, I'm sure, is true.
Yeah, the American opinion is correlated to what we get from the news, and even though climate scientists are pretty starkly in agreement, it looks like a debate on the news, and so the public considers it an open question.
That's stupid.
Well, is it? You know, like, imagine if, you know, most of the American public doesn't have access to science education that's very meaningful or relevant or modern. They really don't know, and they really trust their news sources. So they turn on, and this is not like I'm not saying Fox News is bad and NBC is better or something. Like, they're turning on the news, and 72% of news sources treat it as an open question in reporting. And so the public just kind of takes that. They go, yeah, I guess so.
Not, so why are they treating it like that?
Well, because it doesn't make much of a story to say people still agree. How am I more likely to get on the news? If I go, okay, my name is Jose Caballero, and I agree that rabbits are real, or am I more likely to get on the news if I say, hi, my name is Jose Caballero, and rabbits are not real? Which of these is more newsworthy? I put that thing up on the board. There's like 200 kids walking around the campus by 10:15 talking about how Jose doesn't believe in rabbits. It did not make news when everybody assumed that I must agree with you that rabbits are real. You know what I mean? Plus, go ahead and prove me wrong. I've done this in all my periods. It takes a while for kids to really get into it. I don't believe in rabbits.
Have you ever seen a rabbit before?
I've seen funny-looking cats and funny-looking dogs. Have you ever seen a rabbit? Didn't think so. Yeah.
What did you want the rabbit hutches for?
For breeding rabbits. Because strangely, people don't believe in climate change, but they sure do believe in other science. You know what I mean? Like, I could say I don't believe in rabbits, but I would eat rabbit meat, whatever that is. So maybe I kind of can't have it both ways. It is not logical. Most people who don't believe in climate science still trust the weather forecast.
Why would you eat rabbit meat if it's just going to be imaginary meat that's not going to make you less hungry?
Are we back to actually arguing about the existence of rabbits?
Oh.
So you want to argue this? I still believe that they are funny-looking cats or funny-looking dogs or something, and they're delicious, and I wanted to breed them into little hutches. Yes?
On the news, don't they like always have 6 scientists that agree that climate change is human caused, and then it's like 1 scientist who believes it's not? So isn't it always like stacked towards?
I don't know if that's true. I can't say either way. I mean, if they were going to be mathematically accurate, they would be about 90-1. Or not 9-1, sorry. They would be about, here's how many scientists agree, 9, versus this one other scientist. And if they were just using climate scientists, they'd have 99 who agree and 1 who doesn't. Right? But I don't think that's the way it works. They just have one guy on this side of the table and one guy on that side of the table. Yeah.
Going off of your rabbit example, aren't you only technically newsworthy because you're going against public opinion?
But that's newsworthy. Like, how many times have you seen reporting on television that scientists are still convinced the Earth is round? But how many of you saw that one guy in the desert who wanted to make a homemade rocket ship in Mojave to go fly into space and prove that the Earth is flat? How about the fact that you've all seen that guy and you know what I'm talking about? Even though he's just the one wacky outlier, that's news. Being in agreement with scientific consensus is not newsworthy.
But isn't it kind of a joke? Like everyone knows there is a lot of flat.
No,
You know,
Isn't it a joke? That like, oh, look at this.
the more people get on the news and talk about the Flat Earth Society, the more Americans will kind of wonder, like, maybe it isn't settled. I mean, bro, if people made a ton of money on you believing the Earth is flat, they might create a lot of news coverage for flat earthers. They might publish curriculum for friendly schools, and they might just muddy the waters more. And I could imagine 50 years from now, the American public actually being a little bit divided about whether or not the Earth is flat. The whole concept of climate change is not complicated. Look, you got it. The whole concept is not complicated and it's not doubted.
Oh, $60.
Let me just wrap up this rabbit thing really quick. How would it look if I walked into the dentist office and said, no, I don't believe in dental instruments, just do it with gardening tools? Or if I drove halfway across a bridge, unbolted the suspension cables and said, nope, I don't believe in civil engineering. Like, if your mommy or daddy say, I want to cut out a bunch of these structural members in the house to just open up the view, as a 16 or 17-year-old, you'd be like, Mom, those might be there for a reason. I'm pretty sure there's like a scientific consensus that you have to have some posts and beams in your house to hold up the roof. Like, we all trust science. We do. You would be really shocked if your mommy and daddy tore apart the house because all of a sudden they don't trust architects, or if they stopped in the bridge because they don't trust civil engineers to disassemble the bridge. You realize it would be wacky if they like walked into the dentist office and said, no, I'd like you to use plumber's wrenches. But you know what? Just to put it in perspective, some of your parents didn't vaccinate you, and some of you think that they might have been right. That's a place where the scientific consensus is 100%. But that got a little fuzzy. There is not one major organization of medical professionals that recommends we not vaccinate children. That doesn't exist. But that got a little fuzzy because Facebook. I think the climate thing is just a really powerful example of this. Like it's not, like how can you call that a system of belief? Like, can I say I don't believe in rabbits? Like, is it up to belief anymore? Like that's a rabbit, and I go, nope, I don't believe that's a rabbit. And they go, no, but we know how to breed them and how to make them into dinner and where they come from, and we understand their genetics and their evolution, and we have, and I'm like, nope, I don't believe in it. And like that word doesn't fit, right? Like if I say I don't believe in rabbits, you're like, that sentence is kind of not right. That's when people don't believe in climate change. Like, let's just not use that word. Like, show me what part of this is wrong. When I run into somebody who doesn't, quote unquote, believe in climate science, I go, well, as a scientist, of course I believe in that, but if it makes you feel any better, I don't believe in rabbits. And they go, huh, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, you know, this thing I just told you. That belief has nothing to do with how we understand, the, you know, how the things work on our planet and what they are. Like we can settle some of those questions. Like that is definitely a rabbit. You'd be absurd to suggest it's not a rabbit. And that is definitely actually real, and you need to know these 4 points, by the way. Point number 1, the fact that some gases accept and re-emit energy, that's really old. The wobbles, you know, the idea that some gases will wobble when heated and then stabilize and give off that heat again, that's really, really, really old science. I would be really surprised if anybody could try to, like, I can't imagine who would argue with that. And then number 2, the fact that heat escaping from our planet bounces back to the surface, you know, like a greenhouse works. Again, like, those experiments are almost 200 years old now. Like, I don't think that that's really up for debate. And number 3, the fact that we're adding, like, you can measure, you can do the math, you know, like, how much coal was used, how much coal was burned, how much CO2 per ton of coal. Like, that's all doable. You know, like, how many gallons of gasoline, like, that's written down somewhere. And then, like, how many carbon bonds in a gallon of gasoline and how much CO2 does that make? Like, that's all, like, that's just data. Like, saying that CO2 has gone up, like, that's measured. It's been measured for a long ass time. And so bubble number 4, we are warming the planet. I just can't, I can't figure out what there is to argue about. Like, that thing is definitely an effing rabbit. It's got like the soft coat and it hops around and it's got the little wacky ears and like the little cute nose. It's a rabbit. And if you say you don't believe in it, well, I'm sorry, I just don't know what we have to talk about. Like, I think the problems are much more fundamental than trying to discuss science with you. I realize how hostile this sounds, right? Like, can you imagine if you're a student in my room who comes from a climate denial household or whatever, Like, I must make you feel so bad. I'm so sorry. I've thought about this. I'm not insensitive to this. But I really feel it's like you showed up to a rabbit breeder and said you don't believe in rabbits. Like, I just don't know what we're going to talk about now. Anybody else want to talk to me about our global understanding of climate? I'm about to move on from this topic, so I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts. Yeah?
So, if you read a climate change denier, have you actually said, I don't believe in rabbits?
I literally use that when I'm trying to be friendly.
Okay.
Because a member of my family who shall remain unnamed because I'm being broadcast on YouTube, a number of parents at every single open house back to school event, members of the public who find out I teach environmental science, you know, and yesterday I sold a couch to some dude on Craigslist, and he says, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, I teach environmental science. And he goes, oh, are you one of those climate job guys? And I was like,
What?
no, my job's in education. And he goes, no, I mean, I was like, yeah, man, yeah. But I don't believe in rabbits. It's that, you know, like and he left. So we didn't really get to have the whole talk. It was really nice. Yeah.
So do you think the debate continues because it would be too institutionally disruptive to agree that what we're doing is just horrible?
I don't know, man. Like, social analysis, like, why are you asking me? I'm like the stupidest person that you've ever met. I'm biased and I'm from another country anyway. Like, you want my social analysis? People get so rich off you being confused that you can't rule out the fact that this is just intentional. Second of all, we make it really easy by believing what we want to believe because none of us wants to feel like we're part of a huge problem. So, like, there's this thing where people in the South still say that slaves had a really good life and it was better than being in Africa and, like, they got to eat really well and, like, because, like, you just don't want to believe that your life comes from a horrific cost. You know what I mean? So I think that climate is, like, we all want to deny that it's a really bad thing because, God forbid, we feel guilty. You know, and that's true for me. Like, I often, like, justify the things that I do. Like, oh, well, you know. I think that climate denial is one of the really big, easy lessons in the fake news generation. You know? Like the whole, like, Russian intervention, fake news. I just heard a fascinating study. Fake news on Facebook spreads 4 times faster and reaches 74% more people in the first hour than real news stories on Facebook. Like, obviously, because it catches your eye, right? So I don't think that we're a scientifically literate people. That's a problem. I think that we're not being logical about how the world works. That's a problem. I think the idea that the planet is something that we can modify and change goes against a religious worldview about who's really in charge and what our role on the planet is, and that has to be a part of the picture. But I think primarily the fact that people get rich off you being wrong and that we don't want to admit that we're part of a really big problem. Yeah. And man, my social analysis is a total waste of your time. Don't listen to me. You're all like 1,000 times smarter. Yeah.
Who's getting rich? Like,
The energy sector is the most profitable business in the history of money, give or take. So very few people have made more money than the average of the energy sector. So people who are in charge are really wealthy. You know, the profit margins on energy delivery, energy infrastructure, energy extraction are very high compared to many other industries. It's also become very challenging for a lot of energy companies to make a living. Most recently, environmental regulations have made it almost impossible. So people have grown a lot of wealth, built a lot of investment, and now feel like they can't get that back. So they're struggling to maintain their access to that outcome. But yeah, like the most profitable corporate quarters in the history of money, I believe were all gasoline companies. Like the most money ever made by a corporation in a 3-month period. Like the top 10, I believe 9 of the 10 are all energy. Petroleum in particular. Anybody else? Yeah.
So, you've been doing all the math for a spherical Earth depiction.
Yeah.
Is the science still the same if the Earth was actually flat?
Good God.
We would have to develop what that Earth is doing in the solar system. Like, is it spinning? And is it
So you mentioned
orbiting?
axial tilt, right? But the Earth just goes like this.
Yeah, right. So yeah,
Right, so it goes like this.
yeah, I'm not sure that I've really grappled with the limitations of my phony model.
Okay.
I'd like to argue space doesn't exist. All of those
It actually doesn't.
Right.
Like, why would space be real? I don't understand.
Hey, but what about the future? Watch me, please. Isn't there an interesting conversation to have about the future? Should we care? Why would I care? What comes next? And so on. Check this out. I believe this is in one of your study goals. Anybody know which one had global climate models? Which study goal was about climate models? Twenty-two? Oh, and I forgot to give you one other answer. I think a lot of people want to debate other than the climate science. They want to debate whether we should tax gasoline more or whether we should give up our economic advantages over other countries. And that's a fine debate, and I'm open to that conversation. And because of that, they poo-poo climate science. They say this must be a scam by other countries to lower our global competitiveness because it could, you know.
So, like, denying climate change helps them with their ulterior motive.
Which is, in my opinion, a perfectly defensible motive using the wrong debate. Okay. So we know about the past, we know what's natural, we know what's man-made, we know how greenhouses work, we know how climate has changed, we know that the science all agrees, we know that the public is swept up in this quote-unquote debate. Where's this all going? Climate models cannot predict the entire future. There is no predicting the future, because the future is complicated. There's a lot of variables. That should be obvious. These are the limitations of our climate models, that we don't understand the whole system, and that there's a lot of questions about that system. It's a complicated world, with the future's complicated. But I have some interesting data for you. First, our climate models have become increasingly complex. In the 70s, we just looked at sun, CO2, and rain. Since then, we've made a lot of improvements to climate models. We've added a map that has differences in albedo and elevation. We've added sea ice and clouds. Later on, we added cloud height. We've added decomposition activity in the ocean and on land. We've added cities. We've added ocean movement on the surface. We've added other gases. We've added other natural gases like volcanoes. We have added carbon cycling on land. We've added fresh water on land. We've added deep ocean circulations. We've added particulates to the atmosphere. We've added secondary chemistry, reactions between ingredients of the atmosphere. We've added different vegetation types, because like farms and trees do different things. We've also increased the granularity of our models. Instead of running the equation on 600 blocks of the planet, like new cell phones have more megapixels for the image, we have now better pixel number for our models. So we can get a lot more detail about how the models are different in more parts of the planet. And please look up. We've calibrated them against the past. And please look up. No matter which model, they all show continuing global heat. There is no set of variables that shows our planet cooling. That does not exist. Best case scenario, we still have heating in the short term and in the long term. Not only is Abby on her cell phone, she doesn't even have school materials. She's just here for her phone. Short term, long term, best case scenario, mid case scenario, worst case scenario. Watch this one. If all the humans disappear, temperature keeps going up. If all the humans disappear and you miraculously control greenhouse gases, temperature keeps going up. Because of these positive feedback loop and snowball effect issues.
Basically, like, the damage we've done is, like, irreversible. Like, we're already too far in to, like, fix it so much. I mean,
Well,
we could fix it, but, like, it's still gonna heat up.
when you say irreversible, the answer is yes. In the short term, we have already launched warming. Now, all of our future questions are how much more. Like when this graph was made, we had a business as usual line. But since this graph was made, our emissions of greenhouse gases globally have increased. And they've increased in the rate of growth. If you speak calculus, the double derivative is positive. So yeah, all the plans show heating. There is no model that shows the planet not heating up. And the question is not whether we can go back to how it was in the 1950s or whatever. The question now is, how much more heating are we working toward? And right now we're working to beating the top line. This will affect our precipitation, it'll affect our circulation of the ocean, our storms, our global food supply, our global water supply, incidence of disease, the number of refugees globally. Our military has been planning for climate change for like two decades now, because they're not idiots. And so while some of our presidents have denied the danger, our military is just planning on it. Because for them, like all the other intellectual people on the planet, they're like, no, that's for real, so let's just plan on this. And climate change is really destabilizing the world peace. You know, people fight over resources more. I want to stop here because to start tomorrow's lecture, I need to set up a demo. Would you please stop streaming, Derek?